distinguished speaker, Dr. Suresh Marcandan, and distinguished attendees today. I'm really proud and honored that we have some very special people with us today. I don't know why this particular seminar is of interest to some of these people. In particular, my good friend Tan Sri Koh Su Kunde. Maybe I should say that he is from Wawasan Open University, is that right? We won't be political today, Tan Sri. Of course, we have people from the Swedish Embassy. Welcome, sir. And also my colleague in the Sunway University board, Tan Sri Ramon Navarana. I must say that I have to be very careful because I could be reported. But he's a great colleague in the board. We always quarrel and, and things like that, but it's good. Now, before we go into the seminar proper, let us just record our great thanks to Tan Sri Jeffrey Chia for creating this university, and in particular this Jeffrey Chia Institute. The idea of the institute is to do research, to do studies, to disseminate findings in relation to economics, education, and so on that interests us in Malaysia, in Southeast Asia, in Asia, and the world as a whole. This was a great idea of Tan Sri Jeffrey Chia, and as you know, he is one of the rare kind that has decided to invest a lot in education for the good of the country, and he is not seeing the education as his own group income. He's doing it as a foundation. Now, ladies and gentlemen, for today, there will be two speakers, myself and Dr. Suresh Marcandan. Dr. Suresh met me after I gave a talk recently in the University of Malaya on roughly the same thing that I'm going to talk today. But he represents to me somebody who can actually deliver an impactful talk. And then when I investigated his background, I was extremely impressed. He is the opposite of me, by the way. I have been entirely from the academic background. Okay, I don't know much about the outside world until when I retire as an academic. Then I discovered what's the real world all about. But Dr. Suresh started off from the bottom as an apprentice. He didn't go up the academic ladder that I was. And let me tell you a few interesting things that he has done in his life. By the way, he's about 2 years older than me. He started off his career as an apprentice at 17 years old, where he was recruited by the United Arab Shipping Company. And he did his apprenticeship in Southampton at the School of Maritime Study. And he was there for about 10 years. Not that he was not able to graduate or anything like that, but he told me that that's how apprenticeship worked. You come in, you out, come in, go out. And at the end, he became a captain, of a ship at the age of 26 years old, sorry. It's incredible, isn't it? And he was with the the Danish shipping line, is that right? I don't know how to pronounce it well, So he has been captain there, and he was captain for 10 years. And he was in the shipping business, working there from 1970 to 82. Then later he became the CEO of a shipping company, EcoShip, from 1995 to 1999. And in 1992 to 1995 also, he was at the International Maritime Organization, representing Singapore in that organization. So he has a very widespread of experience in the shipping industry, but he has been very keen educator and in education as well. He holds a Doctor of Business Administration from the International Management Institute, I believe, which is a which conducts a postgraduate program between the UK and Bonn University. So he has a DBA there. He has a Masters of Business Administration from Hull University, UK. He got it in 1995, and he has a Masters of Law from Northumbria University in 2011. He is also an alumni of Oxford University. He was attached to the Said Business School of Oxford University. He was also with the Harvard Kennedy School and the Lee Kuan Yew School of Government. And he has also lectured in Queensland University of Technology and also in the University of Tasmania. He is currently an Australian citizen, and he moves around Malaysia, Indonesia and Australia doing his business and giving lectures like this. So he is going to bring us from the perspective of the industry and how to contribute to higher education. So without any delay, sir, I welcome you to give your seminar. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm truly humbled. Thanks for that introduction, Tan Sri. I'm truly humbled not only to share a stage with Tan Sri, but also to have such a distinguished audience. I'm truly humbled to have such a distinguished audience. Thanks very much for your time. As you'll see, I'm not a traditional academic, so don't expect anything too theoretical. All I'm going to share with you is to share with you more my personal experiences. From the starting slide alone, you'll see my PhD is from the Global University of Hard Knocks. And therefore, what I'm going to share with you is how I progressed in my academic career and also how my personal life took me to where I am today in business. So I start off by asking the question, is higher education sector contributing to the sustainable competitive advantage? Are we producing world-class leaders and innovators? I'll be asking more questions, right? And let this be an interactive session. Please feel free to chip in. That's what it's all about. The structure, very simply, I've broken it up into 4 parts. Sustainable competitive advantage of a nation, because I feel that higher education should be seen in the perspective of the nation. It is not an isolated industry. Higher education, a basic critique. One thing I observe is that the comments and the challenges of higher education are universal. Whichever country you survey, whichever country you look at, the issues are more or less the same. Third, we look at the elephant in the room. What are the major challenges that we are turning a blind eye to? And finally, are we looking at it as an obstacle or an opportunity? One of my favorite authors, Peter Senge, came out with this great book called The Fifth Discipline many, many years ago, but it's quite relevant even today. Peter speaks about the whole universe as a system and argues that in this current world of complexity, volatility, uncertainty, and ambiguity, we should not look at things in isolation. The old saying, no man is an island. And we should look at it as a system which has interacting, interconnected, interdependent parts. And he argues that one of the biggest problems that we're facing today is that we look at things in isolation and try to solve problems in a mechanistic way. He also says that the only way to stay competitive is to learn faster and be ahead of the competition, whether it is in business, in academia, even in your personal life. The challenge is to be one step ahead of the competition. What is it that we try to cultivate? We try to cultivate a personality, an identity. Does anyone of you here drive a BMW or a Mercedes? No? Good. Very wise audience I've got. Why do people buy these iconic brands? Right. And if you ask most of them, they'll tell you it's for the value proposition, because it delivers quality, it exceeds customer expectations. So my question is, what's so different about a country? Right. Why doesn't a country become an iconic brand? Right? A very famous guy called Simon Anholt devised this many years ago, about almost 20 years ago actually. It used to be called nation branding. And he looks at it as a hexagon of positioning a country at the top of the game, to be the best in whatever you're doing, right? More recently, incidentally, I happen to be quite well known to Simon Anholt, and in discussions he says, look, branding is something you can fake. Through advertising and promotion and marketing, you can create that perception and create a brand. But you cannot fake an identity. Identity is your DNA. That is what is within and which you cannot shake and which a competitor cannot change. In the context of higher education, these are the main areas we got to look at. The population's, can you all see it at the back there? It's a bit small. The population's reputation for competence, openness, friendliness, and other qualities such as tolerance. I call that intellectual capital and brain power. Right at the bottom here, it says the power to attract people to live, work, or study in each country, and how people perceive a country's quality of life and business environment. I call that the magnetism for talent. Why is it that half of Malaysia is down across the border, down south? Right? Because there's an attraction for talent there. Right? We'll also look at this thing called a destination for aspiration. What is it that your country pulls people towards? Be it researchers, educators, lecturers, professionals, innovators, creators. And the country of origin effect, which is for manufacturing, right? Just as much as Germany is famous for its automobile industry, or Switzerland for its watchmaking, or Sweden for its cookies, is it? No. Or its Bang & Olufsen, or cars, for instance, the Volvo, the safest car in the world, right? What is it that's a country of origin effect? So I asked myself the question, what is the purpose? I think Tan Sri did mention I'm authoring a book called The Purpose-Driven Leadership. So I've started exploring what is the purpose of our existence? What is the purpose of higher education? So I'm going to put my friend, advisor, mentor, guide, Tan Sri Raymond here on the spot and ask him, Tan Sri, what is the core purpose, in your opinion, overarching purpose of higher education?
To develop our potential, God-given potential to the fullest, to serve society.
To serve?
Society.
To serve society, to develop potential to serve society. What is your expectation? What do you think is the core purpose? Why do you go into higher education? What would you like to achieve at the end of it? Contribution to Malaysia?
Contribution to Malaysia also.
Okay, the sad thing is whichever way you look at it, there is no universal acceptance on what is the core purpose of higher education. A lot of people will tell you it has this really idealistic view of increasing capacity, wisdom, talent. The others will tell you, no, this is for creating job opportunities, for ensuring employability, for training people to be in the workforce and contribute better. So the biggest problem is that there is no universally accepted definition of a purpose of higher education. And unless you have that purpose, how are you going to deliver? If you don't know where you're going, how are you going to get there? Right? Now there could find at the bottom he says the central purpose is to turn students into thoughtful and interesting human beings. Tan Sri mentioned about the contribution to society. Ask any young kid and they'll say, I ask my children, what do you want to be? I want to get a good job. I want to make a lot of money, right? You ask them, do you really want to get educated? Well, as far as I make money, that's fine. That's reality. That's reality. One of them says, how can I make money without getting educated? Well, I have yet to answer that question. what do the students want? Quite often, it's the opposite to what the administrators and the educators feel. Right? This is obviously a survey done in the US, but there are similar models here. Looking at it from a philosophical point of view, Jürgen Habermas, who's a great philosopher, says that every human being has three interests: a technical, practical, and an emancipatory interest. Technical means they are interested in their work, the mastery of their skills, etc. Practical means it's the social interaction part of you. And so here we argue that learning is a very social event. It is an event that is not restricted to a time or a role or a place. You can learn anywhere, any place, any time. Right? And just make sure that I'm focusing on the word learning rather than teaching. So, I'm posing this question to you. To teach, what is the core purpose? Is it to contribute to the good of society? To secure gainful employment? To deliver world-class research and breakthrough in a field? Don't forget that your ratings are predominantly based on the quality of research and outputs. So that is an important point for any educational institute. Are Malaysian higher education institutes serving that purpose? And finally, where does the service element comes in? Where is the service to humanity, to your community that comes in? And finally, I'm throwing you a very interesting challenge. Assuming that one of the key determinants of success is who you know rather than what you know, and that EQ, the emotional quotient, is more important than the intelligence quotient, is higher education a waste of time and money? In our synopsis, we have indicated that Malaysia is one of the top 5 most expensive countries for higher education. So if I was a little kid starting off at 17, all over again, would I spend my parents' money and time and effort developing networks, building relationships, having social interactions, to get a job and progress up? Funnily enough, I got to the peak of my profession long before I ever went into an university or an institute of higher education. So that's where I'm coming from. All I'm saying is there are 2 different paths. It is the outcome that's important. This, I found, was a fascinating definition by Murdoch. Right. They capture every single element that should contribute to higher education. To build a nation's human capital, creative force for outstanding innovation, etc. Service to society and play a key role in economic and social well-being of the communities. I felt this is a very all-encompassing definition, but then you would argue whether a higher institute can deliver all. Can you do all these things to all students? Is it practical to do that? I'm going to show you a little video clip now, which is just 5 minutes for that. It really captures the essence of talent management. It's hilarious in one way, but it gives out a very powerful message. Some of you may have seen that.
Talent. Malaysia's got tons of them. The latest one being our student Lam Shu Jie finding a possible solution to fight superbugs, and she did it in Melbourne. And then we have Mr. Chan Hon Meng from Ipoh winning a Michelin star selling Hong Kong soy sauce chicken rice and noodle at a hawker center in Singapore. And before that, we hear about Yuna making it big in the US. Oh, there's more. Sheila Hamza getting famous in China. 10-year-old Crystal Lee winning Best Actress Award in the Shanghai Film Fest. Wait, you don't see the pattern? Okay, I'll give you more examples. Jimmy Choo from Penang, discovered by Vogue magazine in London. Minnie Chu from Ipoh, that one that plays every auntie character in TVB dramas, she made a career in Hong Kong. Hua Kian Seng, Sakin Chan boy, invented the pen drive in Taiwan. We love seeing Malaysians winning awards and getting featured by foreign media. It makes us super proud. But rarely any of them are truly homegrown, and only a handful comes back. So do we simply prefer to make our dreams come true overseas? Or our dreams can only come true if we go overseas? While we can't make sweeping assumptions for all types of career, because certain countries do host a more mature environment for certain industries. For example, everyone in film, regardless of nationality, wants to make it big in Hollywood. Or maybe a budding pastry chef hoping to study in Le Cordon Bleu in Paris. These countries build specific industries to be so good that they are the global standard. Naturally, it becomes a magnet for talent. They are the destination for aspiration. So, which Malaysian industry has such an attraction that people say, if you want to make it big, you go to Malaysia? Islamic finance? Halal certification? Oil and gas? While we are trying our best to stand out, the truth is, Malaysia is far from being the land of promise, even for Malaysians themselves. Well, you can say foreign workers see Malaysia as job haven, but we're talking about opportunities for highly skilled labor. Our pen drive inventor once said, a design engineer from his company back in Taiwan came back to Malaysia and ended up as a Chinese school teacher. And I quote him saying, there's no environment or support for design engineers in Malaysia. It's the case of wanting to be an astronaut, but there's just no rocket to be launched in your home country. Khazanah Research Institute published a report showing that youth unemployment rate for people between 25 to 29 years old is at 3.5%. That is higher than the national unemployment rate at 3.1%. So the report drew a conclusion that our economy is not generating suitable jobs for young people today. The number of workers with diplomas and degrees in the clerical support workers category grew from 20 to 24% in 2014. Now that is a loss for the country, because this generation of Malaysians are the most educated, more well-traveled, and more tech-savvy. The lack of opportunities to pursue a career they were trained to do becomes a push factor for brain drain. Those who can't afford to leave settle for a mismatch and a low-paying position. And just so you know, Malaysia has a long list of pharmacy school graduates without a job. There just aren't enough placement. And who said choosing art stream makes you jobless? We are really good at jumping on the bandwagon, but suck at executing fancy plans. Back then, big money was thrown into building the multimedia super corridor, which we all know is a flop. The only consolation is probably magic. Remember Bio Valley, launched in 2003 by Tun M? It's now called the Valley of Ghosts. Then there's E-Village, Tun Daim's brainchild to attract international companies. What happened? Nothing. The latest hype would be to make Tun Razak Exchange into KL's financial district. Let's not jinx it. Fingers crossed that this one works out. Now, aside from the obvious reasons to our brain drain problem, Malaysia has also yet to build up enough soft power to make it a destination of aspiration. Just like Paris is being remembered as the city of romance, fashion capital, baguettes, women who don't shave, it paints us the idea of a fantastic lifestyle so convincing that people rarely focus on how their subway smells like pee. Even Singapore ranks number 23 out of 25 in Monaco's soft power survey. Soft power is sports. It's like Brazil has Ronaldo and a passion for football. It's arts, like Argentina has tango. It's robust startup scene like the Silicon Valley. It's the openness of a society, like Germans welcoming refugees. Malaysia needs to get its together and be known for something substantially good. And at the end of the day, we need to ask, what do talents really want? Good pay, career advancement, conducive environment, and actually enjoy living in places they work at. And let's face it, a young, aggressive, ambitious talent isn't just going to settle here because we have Lee Chong Wei and nasi lemak. Just saying.
What did you think of it? Food for thought. Any comments?
I think very negatively charged. Not balanced.
Not balanced? Fair enough. That's from the edge business. But something that kickstarts. At least food for thought. Let's look at higher education. This author calls it to see the relationship of apparently disparate phenomena. This is what I was speaking about earlier. To look at things from a systemic point of view. World Bank, OECD, ADB have certain criteria for assessing the effectiveness of higher education. Malaysia spends over 5% of GDP. The last figure I saw was about 5.4%, and that's very high in this region. So there is no issue with that. It appears that how that money is spent, everyone's complaining about funding cuts. Could it be that there is no optimization of resources? Reward incentives, excuse me, and poor government management of public institutions. This is in general what the World Bank and ADB see across the region, not specifically to Malaysia, but higher education across the region. This is specific to Malaysia. A recent, very recent study points out the following. Phrases such as education hub, etc., don't walk the talk. There is no institutional desire to excel. This is interesting. Talent is lost to Singapore, which has always been the perennial problem. A key factor is the undeclared ethnic preference that permeates the state and public sector. And Malaysian universities need to make their presence felt to benefit the community. Right? Many are doing it, many are not. This is also very recent, only a month ago, from the US, but nevertheless, I think you'll see kind of patterns of this in Asia. Narrowly focused researchers, not viewing it through the lens of social responsibility. Some of the problems, significant difficulty in explaining work to non-experts, etc. So the question is, do we need to rethink our PhD programs? How relevant are they in today's context? It also points out that multidisciplinary collaboration is vital. Disciplines exist here in silos. And I found that when I started off my career to be a huge problem, because I wanted to learn champu champu. I wanted to mix and match what I really liked. So let me tell you about my humble story. I was born in a very poor family who had to decide whether they could afford a house or a car or pay for their children's education. They decided that even if they had to sacrifice the house and the car, which they did, and sacrifice a meal or two, they would give us the very best in education. My father was a humble teacher. My mother was also a teacher who went on to become a deputy director of education. So as you can imagine, I had more of an education at home than anywhere else. Right? I was under two teachers, not one. And all of them teach me all the time. One thing I also realized is that talent is universal, opportunity is not. This has become my tagline in later years. I believe that everyone has a potential to deliver something if the opportunity is given. And quite often it's that obstruction of opportunity that prevents people from developing. This is what my parents taught me. They taught me nothing about academics. They didn't tell me to get high grades in mathematics or chemistry. They just taught me core values. And they said, that's good enough for you. Right? Keep that in mind and you're all right in any field you do. We don't want you to excel academically. We want you to be a good human being who can contribute to society. My mother used to always say, education must be holistic. Long before Daniel Coleman spoke about EQ, my mother was speaking about it in a different language, of course. Right? And SQ, the spiritual quotient, the discipline, training your mind, etc. Success is not measured by the net worth. These are all things that obviously, basically parents teach you. Then what they did was at the age of 5, they decided to send me to a boarding school. And I thought that I was going to a boarding school to learn something about passing exams and academic stuff. Much to my surprise, none of that happened. I was sent to a school which was modeled on the same lines of, if you're familiar with it, Gordonston, Epsom, and Harrow and Eton, but had very little to do with academics. Apart from those values, they taught us the liberal arts, because they felt that every single human being, that liberal arts is an education for life. And at some stage of your life, you should look at other things other than your own discipline. So they taught us literature, speech and drama, philosophy even, art, culture, history, creative writing, right? Life skills such as survival, camping, scouting, cadetting, and extracurriculars such as horse riding, sports, everything else, right? And a little bit of study. So that suited me fine, because I was not academically inclined. I was not used to these didactic lecture models and listening to stuff. I was more action guy, right? Then, at the age of 17, as Tansri mentioned, my parents couldn't finance me anymore, right? I had a choice to relieve them of their burden, and I had to find a job. And what job could somebody who had just about passed his ordinary level exams, what's it called, SPM, is it? SPM, and not even done A-levels, what chance do I have in life? The only thing I could do was to join the merchant navy. I applied to this company, and they took me as what is called an officer cadet. My parents were appalled because I had to scrub decks, I had to wash toilets, I had to do everything. And then my parents said, "What are you doing all this for?" And I went to the captain and said, "What am I doing all this for?" And he said, "Because unless you know how to do it, you won't get other people to do it." Right? So you start at the bottom. Right? And that's how we started. I learned another interesting thing. Today they're speaking of things called the VUCA world. Right? Volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. I can tell you, there is nothing more VUCA than being on a ship in the middle of the Atlantic or the Pacific with a typhoon or hurricane approaching. It's got every element of VUCA. So in systems thinking, which I started following later, it says it has multifarious interactions and interdependences. It is a system where the sum is greater than the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. This is this whole idea of synergy. And in a synergistic complex, you cannot solve problems in the normal linear method. I do not want to use the word out of the box because it's so cliche, but it needs breakthrough thinking. Therefore, it says we should manage interactions and not actions. Right? A higher education system is a higher education institute is a complex system. You interact with the community, you interact with the regulators, legislature, so it's a complex system. The other big issue that I learned there is that cause and effect are distant in time and space. Your actions today cannot be measured immediately. The product of your action, the outcomes, may only be felt in the next generation. Education is a classic example. In my own country, the country of my birth, which is Sri Lanka, one day they woke up and said, from today, it'll be only one language, the majority language. So two things happened. The people who could not speak that language left the country and went to Australia, England, Canada, wherever. The people who did remain lost their proficiency in English. So it really disadvantaged them more than it did the people it was intended to disadvantage. Right. So the majority community there became so lacking in English proficiency that they were not open to the rest of the world. They could not reach out, they couldn't do research, they couldn't travel globally. So it was something that the cost and effect is still being felt after an educational policy which started way back in 1956. Right. So education plays a critical role in this whole thing. Okay, before I go, sorry. I apologize, the writing there is quite small, but what it says is 95% of learning is tacit knowledge. And I'll read it out. It says, intuitive knowledge and know-how, which is rooted in context, experience, practical values, hard to communicate, resides in the mind of the practitioner, best source of long-term competitive advantage and innovation. In the shipping industry, we do very little classroom work. We go into class for about a few months. Then we go back on a ship, during which time you carry a logbook of workplace assessment. It's called a task and assistant guides textbook. So every single action that you perform in the real world has to be evaluated and assessed. Now you bring that back to the school when you come, and it's a to and fro sandwich process. Right. And then at the end of a period, you go in and sit an examination, which is also more viva type simulation, right? And different ways of assessment, not just textbook writing, answering, or regurgitating from memory. What they are really challenging you is your analytical skills, your thinking skills, etc. So that's basically what I learned in the Merchant Navy, and which no business school taught me. This is something else I learned. Anyone heard of the parable of the scorpion and the frog? Yeah? Yes? No? Maybe? Could be? Okay. In short, a frog and the scorpion were on the bank of a river, and the scorpion said to the frog, I can't go across this river, mate, can you give me a ride? And the frog said, that's fine, but you're a scorpion. What happens if you sting me in the middle of the pond? And the scorpion said, why on earth should I do that? If I sting you, you die, I sink, and I die too. So frog said, that seems a good argument. Puts the scorpion on the back and just along the pond. Right in the middle of the pond, true, the scorpion stings the frog sinks, is thinking. He turns back to the scorpion and says, but you promised not to sting me. Right? And that's why I brought you across on my back, so that we could both survive. And the scorpion turned around and said, it's in my nature, I can't change. Right? So this falls in with what Buckingham and Kaufman speak of many years ago in their book called First Break All the Rules. They argue that people don't change that much. Don't waste time correcting weaknesses. Try to draw out on their strengths and build up on those strengths to a level of excellence. Because each one of us has that strength that can make us a superstar. It's just that that's untapped, it's latent, we don't know of it. So I got quite involved in this area, right? And also going back to what I learned in early days, you can pursue mediocrity in multiple disciplines, but always be excellent in one. It's to be the jack of all trades, but the master of one. So I got into brain theory, which my dear friend Peter Shepard here is very well conversant with. Basically, in brain theory, it says you have a predominance to either the left or the right hemisphere. And it is more or less hardwired into you. 80% of it is in your genes. It is genetic, which you cannot change. This is not personality. We are talking of a preference, right? By and large, what you like when you're a kid is the same you like when you're an adult, give or take. And 80% of that is very consistent. So it says that if you're left brain dominant, you have a propensity to be more, to have a preference for logic, reason, action, etc., facts, analysis. While if you're right brain, you're more intuitive, emotional, etc. This would imply that if you have a dominance in a particular side, you have a greater propensity of succeeding in a particular career or a particular field. Right? Going into this deeper, basically that's what it says. There are 4 quadrants, and you can be, it is very unlikely that you can be predominant in all 4 quadrants. So either heavily right brain or heavily left brain. And depending on that, your career choices will also give you the chance of success. It flows that if you have a dominance in one hemisphere, then you have a preference for particular things. And if you have a preference, then your interest level is very high. Your motivation goes up, and therefore you have a higher chance of getting to competence or excellence. This leads me, so how do you measure it? This, as I must repeat, is not a psychometric evaluation. It is a preference testing method. Famous Confucian saying, choose a job you love and you'll never have to work a day in your life. This happened to be my kind of analysis, done many years ago, mind you, right? It showed that I was heavily concentrated in this quadrant and less so in that, but quite poor in that, which means that I wouldn't love to be an accountant, right? Or an engineer, or an IT guy, right? I'm just a very people-oriented educator, right? And that's what really motivates me and drives me. Right? So I said, okay, this is what I love to do. What was I doing as a captain of a ship? Maybe I had no choice. Maybe that was the only way out. So this is how I ended up in consulting, in strategy, people management, and HR consulting. Now this is interesting. How did I become an entrepreneur? Because as you can see, I had a doctor of business administration. I didn't have a PhD. I still don't have a PhD. I had been a CEO, but no time to publish papers. My teaching experience, and teaching was my passion, mind you, was rather discontinuous because I was doing other things in life. And, sorry, any academics here? But academics appeared to be intimidated by corporate professors entering the ivory towers. So I baked the, subsequent to this, as Tan Sri mentioned in his opening, I went on and did a few things in life and got a few degrees. But that's because everybody challenged me and said, are you really educated? You haven't been to university, right? You missed so much big time. You're not educated. So I did it. So it turned out that this was a blessing in disguise. I was left with no choice but to become an accidental entrepreneur. And the rest is history. Let's look at the elephant in the room. The key challenges, straightforward, everything, where you look at it, management, researchers, optimal, suboptimal use of resources, and administrative bloat. This is a US sample, 60 administrators to 1,000 student population. Right? Maybe interesting to see what the ratio is here, to see whether there is in fact an administrative bloat. There is an obsession with disciplinary expertise. Merit seldom plays a part. Rewards and recognitions are based on research which is quite unrelated to teaching or learning. Begs the question, has the university system lost its core purpose of teaching and learning as an academic institution? Or is it just a job provider? And what is your role? To provide jobs to the private sector? How about the public sector? This is interesting.
Sorry, can I go back to the previous slide? You said it's interactive, so you don't mind.
Yeah.
Now, this is a very powerful statement. Second bullet point. Merit seldom plays a part, and also rewards and recognition are based on whatever. What is the basis for this? Has there been a survey or?
Yes.
Can you elaborate on that?
Sure. I can give you the copy of that survey. Basically, it says it goes back to the slide I showed you before, that there is a lot of, this is mainly for national universities. There are political appointments, right? And the basis of recognition and rewards is not necessary.
The notions a lot of people share, but I'm saying if you've got a basis for it, or can tell us that you've got a statistical or survey basis for it, then it's more convincing.
Yeah, this was a survey done in Malaysia, which I'll share with you after this. Yep. Rewards and recognitions are based on disciplinary research. Now this came up yesterday, funnily enough, on my Facebook account. Your child can choose to learn what they love across disciplines. Very interesting, I thought. Is it practical? How they're going to implement it? Maybe a challenge, but nevertheless it's a good start. Customize your degree.
I think UM has observed that we have broad-based education. It's because of the proliferations of all these colleges and universities looking into markets and then to cut costs. Also, Malaysians, I think, has lost sight after the new economic policy. They do not focus on social sciences, philosophy, sociology. It's because of leadership, and also the people are not up to that level to see things from a bigger perspective. And it's keep on narrowing down. I think we do have, but we don't have the the quality of lecturers. And as you say, the research is just so narrow based. So we did have once during my studies in UM, but then I think it get narrower and narrower. Now it's opening up. But the issue is, to what extent could they take after a bigger and broader base like University of London? They really go into research-based readings and see things from very much broader perspective. And finally, I think, is broader reading from many major sources and also from varied perspectives that make higher education works and make people to be open-minded and to be able to generate knowledge and see things back to the basic. That's going back to basic, that is higher education. Thank you.
So we asked the question, is the glass full or half empty? I must hasten to add, none of these are issues that are easy to solve. Right? It's a complex system. Right? But let's look at some of them. The famous Einstein saying, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again. We spoke about digital disruption. I would like to highlight the last one, MOOCs courses. I was quite fascinated by this thing called MOOCs. And I said, let me try it. So I went into one of these courses, and I, as you realize from my profile, know very little about economics or finance, right? So I did a course on Economics 101 through the Blavatnik School in Oxford University. And I can tell you it was a fascinating experience. I sat at my home, did 2 or 3 hours of work a day, and now I have made it compulsory for all our kids to do at least one MOOCs course. So that's gaining a lot of traction. And unless universities look sharp, there's going to be a decline in that. Intelligent machines, artificial intelligence, etc. These are trends that are not unrealistic. We never expected taxis to be phased out, hotels to be declining with Airbnb, right? We didn't realize that WhatsApp will be such a big thing or Facebook will be such a thing many years ago. And we didn't ever realize that the vinyl disc will go out of fashion, for instance, or the DVD. One of the biggest things that's found across educational institutes that the focus is on teaching and not learning. Right? More progressive institutions are refocusing to learning, customized learning. Funnily enough, we went to the Higher Education Institute where my son attends yesterday. Unfortunately, my son's results were not that good. So my wife and I went to the school, and they showed us all the teacher evaluations, which seemed okay. The teacher had a PhD, but my son claims that he couldn't understand anything. He just walks out of class because he thought he was not learning anything. The delivery was not in tune with what was going on, and many of them apparently did. So there is that teaching-learning nexus. Remove barriers to entry. Google, Microsoft, etc. could enter the higher education market. Cisco is partnering with, I think it's the University of South Australia. Many Australian universities are partnering with tech giants to create other entities. Right? Why shouldn't there be an Apple School of Communication or a Samsung School of mobile communication or whatever? Institutions should be run like a business enterprise. I know Tansri is very passionate about this. Governments cannot give endless funding. So therefore, there should be, but there is a conflict there between academia and business. As far as it is set up as a special purpose vehicle, there is no issue, I believe, in national institutes doing their own business, acquiring land. I mean, most of the American universities have huge land bases which they use to derive and generate income, correct? Academics to focus on core competence of teaching. The teaching excellence framework which they have started in the UK, there again focuses on teaching, right? Not learning. Applied research to be more commercially viable or monetizable. Rethink policies. Australia has a very strong lobby group called Universitas Australia, which is a lobby group of universities which pushes for policy, attracts philanthropy, endowments, etc. It is an uniting body which looks at the common interests of education institutions. A merit-based system, strategic alliances, foreign collaborations. Institute of Malaysia, Wales is an institute, I don't know whether Steve Griffiths is here, is he? No. It's an institute where University of Malaya is collaborating with the University of Wales as a private entity or a semi-private entity. Dual award, monitoring of standards, sharing of curricula, makes it a good partnership. Leveraging the power of alumni. Most of the top universities really leverage the power of alumni. I think universities like Harvard and Oxford rely so much on alumni and push. I just happen to be an executive committee member of the Oxford alumni here, and they are constantly pushing us to increase that outreach. Right. Long after we leave the institutions, they are still getting us to work for them free of charge. Reduce barriers to entry and encourage corporate universities. Right. I think there are one or two here, right? Telecom has a corporate university. This is interesting. This also comes out from a study that produce students who transform Malaysia into a producer of technology and not merely a user. And then I'm asking a few questions about liberal arts, about collegiate learning tests to measure critical thinking and complex reasoning. In the shipping industry, we do all through business simulation or technical simulation, where you are tested in your reaction to real life problems. And I believe even in, for instance, what I know best, the School of Management, there is a potential for business simulation, where you can simulate a number of business possibilities or even futurism to get students to think. Right. The one I got, could we possibly eliminate departments and reconstitute fields around global crisis? Could there be a department of, for instance, global warming, human trafficking, alleviation of poverty? Don't forget, these are multidisciplinary issues. Right. Mass migration involves social, policing, immigration, etc. Psychology. Right. So could these be formed around global issues rather than disciplines? Right. So that these departments attract the best from a multitude of different disciplines. This is what is being called, do I have 5 minutes more? This is gaining traction in many Western places. It's a focus on learning. It's what they call the learning college, to focus more, to turn it from a community of scholars to a community of learners. There's a little paper within your packs called Action Learning, where it is argued that adults learn best with and from each other in solving real life problems. Right? And that is a very powerful way of learning. This is under facilitation. We are also highlighting here the importance of coaching and tutoring. Despite being one of the oldest universities, one of the key strengths of Oxford is its tutorial method. Oxford University focuses heavily on the tutorial concept. And it's a very powerful interactive way of engaging with your learning facilitator and monitoring your learning. Aspects of learning, teaching quality, learning environment, creating an environment that's conducive to learning, which is very important, and measuring student outcomes and learning gains. And last but not least, including contribution to society, the economy, and the environment. After all, the main outcome of education is to deliver something positive to society, to the environment, to humankind even. So that is my humble experience and my few thoughts. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Dr. Suresh, for that extremely interesting seminar. I learned a lot. What I have actually missed in life is the experience that you have gone through. Because I have been most of the time with my parents when I was young. The cane is the one that has been always behind my back. Whereas you have gone through life and you have climbed through apprenticeship and experience. You have put up a slide where the audience here are forced to think deeper. There was that age market slide where a lot of questions was asked in regard to the opportunities in the country, the education system and so on. But I am particularly, and I'm going to remember this, that parable, the scorpion and the frog. Whenever you are in front here, you are a frog. The rest are scorpions, you know. But the one particular saying that I'm interested is, don't try to change people's mind or something like that, isn't it? Actually, I understand this very well, and this is with regard to my own wife, you know. I've tried very hard to change her thinking, actually. She will end up changing my thinking, actually. Because, to be honest, and I'm sure you also agree with me, that anytime you argue with your wife, let her win, right? Otherwise, you'll not have a good day.
I can't answer, my wife is at the back.
Oh, okay. But nevertheless, you have pointed out the strength of raising children through the soft power. And I think you also put up analysis of your own brain. You are a left brain person, is that correct?
Right.
Oh, right, so yeah. I wonder if it is a scientist coming here to talk about issues in education, what will they say, you know? I should have brought in a scientist here or an engineer to talk about that. So anyway, we will have some time for people to question you, sir.
Yeah.
So we'll take about 3 or 4 questions. So if you don't mind standing here.
I thank you very much for the interesting presentation. I just had some 2 small queries. When you mentioned the left brain and the right brain, so for example, I'm left-handed. Does that mean I'm right-minded side of the brain is dominant or not? That's the first question. Shall I ask all the questions first, or you respond?
Can I answer that first?
Sure.
In general, left-handed people tend to be right brain dominant.
Okay.
Statistically, right? So left brain people tend to be more creative, innovative, and are right brain dominant. That's correct, yes.
Okay. And the second question, you were always speaking about teaching as opposed to learning. And I have a problem with that, because I think that teaching is the prerequisite to learning. If you have a good teacher, then it's up to you to learn, because this is your responsibility to learn afterwards. You have at least the basic information and the basic knowledge, and then it's up to you. It's your decision to learn or not. You shouldn't put the blame on the teacher if that he doesn't learn. Is the student's problem, I think. And another issue is that we are all the society now is hooked up on the idea of exams. Personally, I'm a person who really freaks out in exams. I have a PhD, but PhD work is better than the regular BA work, where you have the exams and you have to SWOT for the exam, and it's nerve-wracking during the exam. So why can't the educational system be more focused on research, the learning in the class, not the results of the exam, which can be like misleading. You can have a very bad night and you get really freaked out. You sit for the exam, your brain becomes a blur. You go out of the exam room and you know all of the material, but you couldn't, work your way around the panic. So I think we need to refocus on this issue. Thank you.
Your second question, the tagline for one of my companies is, which is an education company, consulting company, is teaching people how to learn. Right. So yes, teaching is very important. But what we are saying is, at the end of the day, it's like communication. Right? Do you hear what I speak, or do you understand what I speak? Right? I can speak and you can, probably half of you would have never understood. So am I conveying that in a manner that there is absorption? Right? And am I generating the interest for you to explore further and seek further knowledge? And am I guiding you to do that? Right? I dare say, with teenage kids in the house, that's not easy. Right? Now, yesterday in our discussion with these lecturers, we found that this particular lecturer was doing a 2-hour block. And our son, you're lucky if he has an attention span of 30 minutes or 45 minutes, which is the optimal for any a continuous session. And she was quite upset when I asked her, but don't you think this is a bit long? Right? A 2-hour session to capture the attention of a 17-year-old kid, right? Who is a sportsman, an athlete, who has high energy level. Do you want him to sit there for 2 hours and listen to your chemistry or economics or whatever? And she was quite upset with me. But we had to, So there is this conflict always. And in terms of assessment, yes, I hated exams. I just couldn't regurgitate knowledge. I used to always say memorizing is only for parrots. Right? I was really hopefully bad at regurgitating knowledge, cramming for an examination and going and writing that. I didn't think that was education, right? So there are various ways of testing people. In the shipping industry, as I told you, we do a lot of simulation. And that really brings out your skill and your talent.
Good morning, Dr. Suresh. We met just now, right? I think I'm very interested about the video that you demonstrated just now. Yeah, in my view, that probably you need to enhance it with some kind of positivity. I mean, example, the lady was mentioning about how to make the country great again in oil and gas, those kind of things. By the way, I'm from oil and gas industry. I was ex-Petronas, yeah. And just for your benefit and the audience, I think in early 2000, after the millennium, the country decided, there was Tan Sri Hassan Marcandan at that time as a president CEO. He decided, what are we going to do next when the oil production for the national production going down so badly? Yeah, we can't rely on the easy oil based on the shallow water development that we've been depending upon for many donkey years. And there is this block called deep water, unfortunately in Sabah. Huge block. But somebody got to get in and deploy all the technology, yeah, and drill it, explore it, and bring it on production, the development production, until you realize the benefit of it. And finally, we did it, I think back in 2002, when the company, the management decided to form the task force, Deepwater Task Force. And remember that we started from ground zero. And
Number one,
yeah,
sorry.
let me finish that.
Yeah.
So it was a story in 2002 until today, and it has created a lot of benefits. The offshore development, deep water, the onshore or terminal plant, the spin-off of the gas to LNG, and so on and so forth. And for doing that, we have actually put Petronas in the world map of deep water, standing with Shell, ExxonMobil, and the rest. Yeah. So the kind of story actually has been displayed and that's been demonstrated. And not only that, we did encourage university, UTM, UTP, this girl next to me, yeah? Go and create the technology so-called, so that we can, like you said, we can change the mindset from the consumer of technology to the creator of technology. And that's what we're looking for. And that story has been alive, yeah? So not really exactly what 90% what we've been displayed, like, okay, you want to be successful, you go overseas and make your step there. We are actually developing that, yeah?
Number one, I did not produce that video. So obviously there are, as Tansri pointed out, it could have been a little more balanced. Number two, the idea of that was to give a message about talent management and brain drain, right? The fact is, whether you like it or not, just like in my own home country, majority of the best talent is outside the country. And that is not different from Malaysia, I would think. I'm not here to criticize Malaysia, I'm not a Malaysian. I'm just trying to give you an objective of my experience.
But anyway,
in my own home country, majority of the people who are in Canada, the UK, Australia, should or could have been back home. Now I know, for instance, Talent Corp tried to reverse that brain drain. I'm not sure how effective that they have been, but from what I hear in social circles, it hasn't been a phenomenal success.
Exactly.
So which begs the question, are you a magnet for talent? Are you able to attract people who left the country years ago, but who are now coming back? That's all I'm saying.
But anyway, I just want to say, I mean, good, you are successful in doing that. But I was in Indonesia last week, as I said, in the University of Riau, having delivered my talk in oil and gas. I did the same thing to this 200 audience, telling them the country in Malaysia, after all, despite all the scandal that they've been hearing, yeah, we are still there. We are still going to be the hub for the region, not for the country, but for the region. So if you guys, I say the students, if you study hard, study smart. If you cannot land a job even in Indonesian deep oil and gas, there is still Malaysia to be considered. Okay, thank you.
I admire your optimism. Thank you.
Yeah, my name is Un. About 30 to 40 years ago, I worked in a plantation company which had an apprenticeship program. So you have gone through one.
Yeah.
And this large plantation company basically took kids of the workers on the estate in a rural environment and trained them up in technical things. And last month, I met one of these kids who went through the apprenticeship program at the time, and he's now some big shot in an international company, just like you.
Yeah.
So you are influential. So you can see, the program is not just teaching people how to do things properly, focused on maintenance in an estate environment, but it also serves a social purpose of bringing these kids out of poverty, out of the entrapment of poverty in an estate environment. So unfortunately, when the new shareholders and management took over the company, this was discontinued. So now you have gone through this program, you should be very well placed to try to influence companies. I think universities cannot do this. This is going to be done by companies, maybe in association with universities and colleges, to try to do some kind of things like this for Malaysia, because it will also help to bridge the urban and rural divide, besides just education.
I find surprise. I always ask myself, anything good, let's start from us, ourselves playing the role. And as mentioned out, education is also to provide social mobility. More than that, I think in Malaysia, we always emphasize on social integrations and equality and inclusiveness. But in reality, it's politics and policy that could have a big impact. So just now, based on the video, right, shown that the brains, you point out that, Suresh, Dr. Suresh point out that it is an issue of brain drains. Why these talents could not be developed in the country, and this particularly are the non-Bumiputera. So I think we have to be realistic. Malaysia is a very beautiful country, multiracial, multicultural, full of diversity. But the issue, you also mentioned out the shared experience of Sri Lanka. We push for one language policy that at the expense of so many other factors, then we need to ask one question. Is it a well-thought, comprehensive policy that can see far ahead, not only for the politicians, but the country, the people? And I think Malaysia is at this juncture to answer the question, is this a reality? We need to be brave and bold and not see things from our own experience and ethnic. If we really love our country, if we really have a good higher education, we need to go back to the basic. And that is civilization, that is sustainability, that is humanity. Thank you.
I believe that higher education, or education in general, has to be a driver of the economy. Right? That means that they should contribute at every edge of industry or business. That means that the education industry has a role not only to educate, but also to identify, nurture, develop, retain, and reward talent. And when I mean reward, it's not monetary reward, but giving them the opportunity for expanding your brain capacity or your intellectual capacity. So to me, the core purpose of an education institute is to be a role model for talent management. You are vested with the National Talent Management Program, if you like. And that cuts across every walk of life, from the poorest to the richest. Right? Education is a great equalizer. There is no more powerful or potent weapon to alleviate poverty than education. Right? My own example, right? Born in poverty, the only thing that pulled me out of it was education. And I'm sure there are many other examples of such. Right.
Okay.
Many tycoons will tell you the same thing.
Hi, I'm Isabel. I write for Study International. Talking about the learning over teaching, you mentioned TEF in the UK, for example. Are there countries that you feel are doing this and are doing this right and well, focusing on learning over teaching? Or is it something that sort of not just Malaysia, but you feel the world needs to work towards?
I think Australia does that pretty well. Mm-hmm. We have, as you know, Australia is a very egalitarian system. So the feedback is 360-degree evaluation, including peer evaluation, which I don't see happening here. Right? So quite often, you will always have monitors and evaluators of your teaching from among your peers. Now, I don't know whether this is culturally unacceptable here, but I think a 360-degree evaluation from students, right? If you ask only the students to evaluate, I'm sure my son would give an awful score for his teacher, yeah. Right? So you need a balanced evaluation of learning and teaching. Mm-hmm. So I think peer evaluation is pretty good way to do that, right? And perhaps even get outside, totally independent observers. Right.
Do you think that's a problem Asia-wide or Malaysia?
It could be a cultural problem, it could be an administrative problem. Okay. I'm not sure. Is it a cultural problem to have peer evaluation of teaching? Because you have academic freedom, you are within a so-called sovereign territory, you're the king of your domain or queen of your domain within the classroom. Is it an intrusion into your professionalism if you have a peer evaluator? Is that culturally acceptable? In Australia, it's fine.
A module, and I think all students will evaluate their lecturers as far as teaching, teaching presentation and delivery and all that. But I think what we may not feel comfortable is that direct evaluation. When you talk about peer evaluation, it may not necessarily be face-to-face. And I think this is something that from the cultural conditioning, it is kind of hard. You have to break that mold that if I criticize you in front of others, I may drop your water face.
No, it is. I didn't mean criticizing, but
just any feedback. You know, a lot of times, sometimes the fact that you're giving feedback is and negative.
Yep.
So you may have to design ways that are more acceptable, to the recipient. Yeah.
Yesterday when I asked this teacher, you have a PhD. Could it mean that, could it possibly be that you're pitching at a higher level than what a 17-year-old kid can grasp? And she felt quite offended by that. She felt very offended by that. Oh, no, I've been teaching for a long time, I know what I'm doing, type of thing. But I was just asking a question. Right? So feedback has always pushback. So this could be a cultural thing. Whereas in Australia, if you get feedback, particularly negative feedback, you look at it positively and say, how can I improve myself? Am I doing this wrong? Yes.
If I could just make a brief comment here, in relation to peer feedback or peer evaluation, perhaps it's the concern about how it is used, the system in which it operates. If it is operating at a developmental level, where it is confidential between the person who is being evaluated and the peer evaluator, perhaps you've got more opportunity of having it work successfully, rather than it being something that is used in terms of bonuses or promotions and so on. So it's really about the whole system being seen as a learning organisation, whereby it's just understood that people will not be perfect and will make mistakes, because the whole system outside is changing. And rather than being punitive, it's about looking at it and working together towards improving and everyone moving on. Maybe that's an idealistic situation, but perhaps that's what we should be striving for.
It's a change of mindset, isn't it? Even in the corporate world, if you do staff evaluation, it is always seen as a punitive measure rather than a development measure. So you're assessing that guy either to deprive him of a promotion or to deprive him of a bonus, or on the other hand, to give him a bonus. Right? It's never seen as a developmental issue. And so it needs to be, as you quite rightly pointed out, a learning culture within the organization that says every single thing done here is not a criticism, but a feedback for development purposes.
Yes, sir, at the back. Yes.
Hello.
Yes, sir.
I just want to ask a simple question. I'm not in the education line and stuff like that, but from what I observe as a citizen is that isn't it important that in a learning environment you must start from a neutral environment to be able to encourage all the people to actually learn well? This is basically a question on, is there a requirement that the environment be secular rather than have an environment where you have dogma coming in, which is actually the real situation we're facing in Malaysia now. What is your view in terms of having a neutral secular environment in a learning organization?
Well, I'm a great believer in diversity. There is no greater strength in diversity. I'm not talking in terms of race or nationality or religion. I'm talking of intellectual diversity. We do a lot of work in team building, and that's another whole field of study, where
that's not my question. My question is it a prerequisite, okay, for a productive or effective learning organization or environment that it must be neutral and secular?
Yes, it is desirable to be secular. But that's not for me to decide.
The learner hasn't learned, the teacher hasn't taught. If you link that back to your PhD teacher, the learner hasn't learned, he's not doing a job.
Thank you very much for all the questions. I know this session has been very thought-provoking. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.